Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Crazy Lightbulb and welcome back to D&D Tips and Guides. Now, we're going to be going over briefly on using ability scores. And I'm going to be telling you certain rules on how these ability scores work. Now, what are ability scores? Ability scores are your strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Now, strength measures physical power. Dexterity measures agility. Constitution measures endurance. Intelligence measures reasoning and memory. Wisdom measures perception and insight. Charisma is your force of personality. Now, how do these ability scores work? Now, when you roll for your stats in the beginning of the game, you have what is called modifiers. So if you rolled an 18, you have a modifier of 4. If you have a 16 as an ability score, you have a modifier of 3. Now these modifiers are added to your so-called ability checks, saving throws, and so much more, such as attacks and everything. These ability scores, or these modifiers, do everything for you in the game. The ability scores are just the basis of how strong you are and what is leading up to the modifiers. Now, as we go on from here, actually you can go ahead and check the chart. This right here is the chart. Let me see if I can highlight it all. Well, I can't highlight it all, but I highlighted some of it. This is the ability score chart. If you have any questions on what your ability score is, this is the chart that you want to check out. Now, as we go up, what is advantage and disadvantage? Advantage and disadvantage is whether you are skilled in something or whether determining on what you do can give you bad repercussions or to give you good repercussions. So if somebody's assisting you, like let's say you're talking to a merchant, and the merchant's like, "I'm gonna give you 30 gold for this," and you're like, "No, you're gonna give me 20 gold because my friend here," and your friend steps in, "Yeah, because I've been buying these my whole life, and these have never been that high a price." At that point, your friend is assisting you. Usually when somebody assists you on a roll, whether it's a strength check or anything that you can really assist at, you can get advantage on. Advantage means that you roll 2 dice, which are 2 d20s, 20-sided dice, and pick the higher of the 2. Now, this is great because at that point you have a better chance of getting a bigger roll. So having advantage is really awesome. Now, disadvantage, that's a little bit harder to swallow. So if you're talking to a merchant and just being like, "Hey, I would like to buy this." "Well, that'd be 30 gold. Wait a second. Can you bring it down just a bit?" At that point, you would kind of roll for a disadvantage because you did such a shitty job haggling that you kind of have to, you kind of bombed it. So at that point, you would have disadvantage. At disadvantage, you roll 2 dice and you pick the lower of the 2. That's not really good. You try to want to avoid those as much as you can, but you just can't help it sometimes. Sometimes you'll get disadvantage on rolls and you won't even know it. And it's up to the dungeon master a majority of the time whether you have disadvantage or advantage. So that's how advantage and disadvantage works. Proficiency bonus. Proficiency bonus is based on our class level. Now, usually from like 1 to 4, your proficiency bonus is +2. From around 5 to about 9, 5 to 8, your proficiency bonus is 3+, and so on and so on. Now, monsters also have this bonus as well. That's incorporated in their stat blocks in the monster manual. So it's not you're not the only one with proficiency bonuses. But proficiency bonuses are added usually to all your skills that you are trained in, and your attacks, your spells, your everything that you usually normally use. Saving throws, but you have to be, if it's about a skill check or a saving throw, ability saving throw, at that point you have to be trained in it, because otherwise you will not get this bonus. So if you are trained in a strength saving throw, and your strength is 4, and you're trained in it, you get, let's say at level 1, you're a +6 to your roll instead of a +4. But let's say if you weren't trained in it, you would only get a +4, not a +6. And that's how proficiency bonuses usually work. Now there are some skills out there that actually go about it even more. Now ability checks have certain things, what is called DC, which is the difficulty classes. Now, these are determined by your dungeon master. You'll never know what the DC is on something unless he physically goes outright and tells you. So you have to make that roll, such as if you're rogue and you're lockpicking, well, this is a pretty basic lock, so we'll make this easy. So you have to get within a 10. If you get lower than a 10, you fail. And if you go a little bit higher, like, oh man, we're breaking into a vault, this is going to be very hard. So you have to make a DC of 25. So if you don't make that roll with all your bonuses and everything added into your roll, you fail. So that's how difficulty classes work. And usually it's all based on the dungeon master himself. Now, what I like to say is that dungeon masters should keep that there is magical essence and fantasy essence to the game in breaking reality, but at the same time, everything in real life is the same thing as in normal life. So if you have a shitty padlock at home, how hard is it to break into? Probably not that hard. So it's the same kind of concept here. Now, let's talk about skills. Every genre, or every ability trait, such as strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, and constitution. Well, constitution doesn't have any skills. All constitution have is a saving throw. But strength has a skill athletics. Dexterity has acrobatics, sleight of hand, and stealth. Intelligence has arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion. Wisdom has animal handling, insight, medicine, perception, and survival. Charisma has deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. Now there are many different types of skills and what they do. If you don't know what a skill does, go ahead and look at this book, because this book is going to be telling you, or even look up on wikiadnd.com. Wikia D&D is actually not a really bad place to check out certain things. Yes, Wikia is bad, but some Wikia is actually very informative. I highly recommend that you don't always go to Wikia for all your problems, that you go to real sources and real books. So, let's talk about contest throws. Contest ability checks are something that is very crucial to the game. So let's say if you're lying to someone. Well, I'm going to roll for deception because I'm lying about something. So you roll, you get a really good number. What does the other person have to roll? Do they just believe you automatically? No. They have to roll an insight check to see if you're lying. To see if they can see your twists and turns. Almost like you're kind of reading a poker face. So, what are they going to do? They're going to read you. And if they win, they know that you're full out lying. They don't know why you're lying. They don't know what you're hiding. But they know you're lying. It's the same thing when you're going against a strength check against each other's, like arm wrestling matches or grapplings. Usually you can roll acrobatics or athletics to get out of a grapple, but we'll go over that later on. So those are kind of contested rolls, and usually you'll go over that more within the groups of checks. Your passive checks are 10 plus all your modifiers originally. Now the thing is, if you have a passive perception, which is basically a passive check where you don't have to roll, usually if you're trained in perception, you get to add your proficiency to your passive. If you're not trained in it, you don't. So if my perception modifier was a 3, my overall score would be 10 plus 3. That's my passive. Now, If I was trained in perception, I would have a +2 at level 1. So it would be 5. So I would get 5 plus 10. So that would be 15. So that's the difference between passive and regular perception. Or being trained in a passive and then not being trained in a passive. There's passives for everything. But usually if you have a dungeon master that makes you roll all the time for everything, usually passives only go for certain things. Group checks. Now, group checks are always fun because if you're doing survival, if you're doing something like this, usually what you want to do is you want to give certain people advantage on finding food or finding this or looking for history. If you have a group of like 7 or 5 or like 5 to 7 people or even more than that, you really don't want the whole group rolling for survival checks. You usually want that one person that's really good at survival to kind of be the shining star at that moment. You know, if he fails, nobody else should be able to like other people can be able to make the same check, but it's just not going to be the same. Like, again, you can't have everyone reading out of the same book for like a history check or for an arcana check. It's just certain things you can do as a group check, which are like usually perceptions, stealth, even insight, or yeah, insight's a good one, and possibly survival is a good one. Yeah, survival's a good one. But let's talk about what genre and what are some of the strengths. What are some of the ability skills that you learn. So athletics. Athletics is basically how it sounds like. Athletics is based on your climbing, your jumping, your how well you grapple and how well you can jump and do other athletic things. There are certain things that go with having the strength. Now having strength, usually you add your strength modifier to all your melee abilities, such as mace, battle axes. Use it to your attack and damage roll for melee items. Also, you have lifting and carrying capacities. Now, lifting and carrying capacities pertain to your strength modifier or your strength score multiplied by a certain number. So your carrying capacity is your strength score, not a modifier, multiplied by 15. Your push, drag, and lift is 30 times the carrying is 30 times your strength score. So we'll go from there. If you're over encumbered, usually what happens is your speed drops. If you don't exceed over your encumbered, then you're good. But usually when you're heavily overweight with a bunch of shit on your back, usually you lose speed. So, now we're at dexterity. Acrobatics. Acrobatics is all about balance, such as the tightrope, staying upright, watch for rocking ships, kind of saving yourself from falling. That's usually acrobatics, such as flips and all the other crazy stuff that you can do with the acrobatics. Also, sleight of hand. Sleight of hand is usually a contested roll that you have to make between somebody and somebody else. Well, actually, no, that's wrong. So, basically, sleight of hand is great for when you're trying to be stealthy with your hands. So, if you're casting a spell and you're trying to not let people noticing you because it's only a somatic, which is your hand gestures, and you're trying to be stealthy about it, then that would be a sleight of hand check. Or if you're trying to pickpocket someone, lift a coin purse off another person, that'd be sleight of hand. But what usually follows up with that is a stealth check. Stealth checks are made for everything, such as sneaking up, slipping away, getting ready for a sleight of hand check, and so on. Other dexterity checks that may occur is such as picking a lock, disabling a track, wiggling out of your bonds, crafting certain small items. There is so much that you can do with Dexterity. It's pretty cool. Like, you thought Strength was pretty useful. Dexterity is actually incredibly useful too. Also, Dexterity can be also used for attack and damage rolls with certain melee weapons and all your ranged weapons. So if you're firing a bow, use your Dex modifier. Now, if you're using such things as dagger with a finesse property, which we'll go over a little later, in combat-wise, that you can use your Dex modifier. Certain weapons allow you to use your Dexterity, and certain weapons will allow you to use your Strength. So that's pretty much how that works. If you have questions on that, go to your weapons, and it'll tell you if the weapon is either a finesse, or a light weapon, or if it's a thrown weapon. I believe thrown weapons can only use Strength, but, you know, I believe you can go either or. So, here we are. So now, Constitution checks. Constitution checks are pretty simple, based things, such as hit points, how much you can handle a certain amount of hours of labor, going without sleep, surviving without food and water, and if you get drunk, can you withstand not puking? Alright, intelligence check. Intelligence checks are really, really good. Now, intelligence checks are mainly for a number of things, such as Arcana, History, Investigation, Nature, Religion, and communicating and doing other things, and winning games with skills such as chess and all like that. Now, Nature, Religion, Arcana, and History. History is basically you learning about lore and historical events. Arcana is learning about historical lore on Arcana, spells, magical items, ruins, magical traditions, planes of existence, and such like that. Nature is more towards terrain, plants, animals, weathers, and the natural cycles of life. Religion is more towards the aspect of religion, deities, rites, symbols, and practices. Investigation is exactly what it sounds like. You're investigating, you're trying to find stuff, you're trying to look for something specific, you're trying to see for clues. It's exactly how it is. It's just like what a police, or basically like, oh gosh, not that. Well, basically like what an investigator does. He investigates. Or a private investigator. That's exactly what it is. By the way, let me go back real quick. So, when you're rolling a stealth check, usually you're going against the other person's passive perception. So, if you roll a 30 for your stealth check, let's just say, and the other person has a passive perception of 15, he does not see you. If a person is actively looking for you, he has to continually roll every round to see if he can find you. If he cannot find you, you are still remained hidden. So, being hidden is actually very good because it gives you advantage on an attack before you are seen again. It also gives you advantages on certain other things if you're messing with the other person, such as it could be sleight of hand, it could be other things, it could be many other things, but it's mostly Dungeon Master's preference. Now, Wisdom. Wisdom is really interesting. Wisdom is more about your natural skills that reflect on yourself and your feelings and your noticing of environments. Animal handling is exactly how it is. If a horse is spooked, or if you see a domesticated animal and you're trying to calm it down, if you're trying to read what the animal is feeling, if it looks scared, if it looks happy, usually use an animal handling check. Also, if you're riding an animal, like such as a horse, you actually do an animal handling check. Insight. As we talked earlier, insight is where you read the other person, determining where they're lying, determining what their next move is, and reading their speech, and determine it from their speech habits, their mannerisms, and languages. Medicine. Medicine is basically the exact thing it is. When you roll for that, you roll on stabilizing, how to diagnose. Basically, medicine is kind of like being a doctor. Perception. Perception is how well you perceive things such as spot, hear, smell, feel on the floor, such as that. Let's go up, because I believe we have one more. So perception is used for a lot of things, and you will be doing that, such as seeing for a trapdoor and other things. Passive perception is more of if you're just basically browsing around and you're just looking around. Other perception, when you're really looking into stuff, again, like let's say you're trying to find someone and you know they're here, that's rolling for a perception check. When you're walking down the road and you see stuff in the corner of your eyes, such as, hey, you notice that you hear something coming 100 yards left of you. Oh, that's because you're passively hearing stuff. There's a difference between passive and actively trying to look for things. Survival. Survival is how well you track, hunt, guide through certain terrain, and also find out what kind of animals or anything that lives nearby and natural hazards. So usually clerics and druids are the ones that use this, but usually you don't have to worry about that, but that's kind of how this aspect works. Last things we're going to be talking about is charisma. Charisma checks such as deception. Deception is how well you lie, how well you go about things, and how well you hide things. Intimidation is how well you scare your opponent into forcing him into a hostile scare, kind of like, oh crap, pushing for information kind of intimidation. You are basically the bad cop. Performance. Performance is basically how well you perform certain tasks, such as dancing, acting, storytelling, music, and other forms of entertainment. Persuasion. Persuasion is how well you can socially persuade people to be on your side, such as when you're trying to make a good point on something. Well, you know, if I don't buy this now at this store, it might sit here for another week or two, and that's money that's not in your pocket. That's persuading him to actually lower down the price or to give it to you for a certain price because you're giving him incentive to lower the price. Other ways you can use charisma checks is to find the best person to talk to and also find out what are the best key topics in crowd conversions. So, saving throws are exactly what they are. Saving throws, I believe that is it. Saving throws are basically when you're at a certain situation and you need to roll saving throws, such as a snake bites you and you're becoming poisoned. You roll a Constitution saving throw because you can see how well you can endure the pain and endure the poison. Or if you are being charmed by a vampire, such as Dracula and other things, you actually roll a charisma saving throw. Usually at that point to see how well, or it's usually charisma, wisdom, or intelligence, depending on the certain type of spell or ability. But for instance, we'll go with charisma. At that point, you are rolling a charisma saving throw to actually withstand it. To avoid a fireball, falling, or falling debris, you roll a what is it? A dexterity saving throw. If you are trying to resist a grapple or trying to resist being restrained, it's usually a strength saving throw. Different types of saving throws have different types of abilities. You will be using all of them very, very often. Mostly, you'll be using them in combat. So bear in mind, if you have any questions on ability checks, ability scores, or saving throws, go ahead and talk to your dungeon master and ask them what they can do better. Well, not what they can do better, but what the insight is on all these checks and knowledge on these checks and what they do and what they don't do. Can I use a check for this, or can I use a check for this? Basically, just talk to your dungeon master and ask for their advice, or ask questions if you do not know what this does. Anyways, this is Crazy Lightbulb. And this has been a long, long talk on the ability scores and ability checks and skills and so on. So until that time, I will see you in the next video. This has been Dungeons & Dragons Tips and Guides by Crazy Lightbulb. Please like and subscribe and follow. if you can. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.